What's up everybody? Today I'm going to be breaking down my recent trip to Hawaii. I visited the Big Island and Kauai, so I'm going to be going over aspects of these two islands here, logistics, how to get there, how to get around, places to stay, whether it makes sense to stay at these fancy hotels or are there other options for the budget traveler such as myself. I'm going to be covering location advice as far as when to visit, what time of day, what to expect as far as weather. That's also going to depend on the time of year you visit, and as well as general advice as it pertains to photography when you're visiting these two islands. So let's dive right in. So in general, when you visit the Hawaiian Islands, they have a wet season and a dry season. Summer is generally the dry season, winter is generally the wet season, and there will be a tourist high and low season in both of these. So at the beginning of the summer in general, it's going to be the high season. The beginning of the winter / wet season is going to be another little peak high season. So if you're planning your trip on the budget end of things, you want to kind of maneuver around these peak high seasons. The Big Island of Hawaii, as the name suggests, is the biggest island in the chain of islands, and because of this and because there are two large volcanoes in the middle, you'll have very distinct weather patterns on either side. Generally, the west side is drier and the east side is rainier. So when you visit these locations, you're gonna have certain weather elements to deal with, as well as what time of year that you visit. Kauai is one of the smaller islands in the chain, but still has the same kind of weather patterns where it's drier in the summer and wetter in the winter. As far as the geographical layout though, it is not split in the middle as the Big Island is. It's just a little bit rainier on the inside in locations such as Waimea Canyon and drier on the outside. Also to be considered is that it rains a little bit more at night or early morning and sunnier during the day. So it might be a point of frustration when you're trying to make it for a sunrise or a sunset somewhere and it's been a perfect day otherwise. Although the Big Island is the largest geographically, it is not the most populated. I believe Oahu might be the most populated between Oahu and Maui. Those are two of the more populated islands, but the Big Island is pretty sparse and there is a lot to see there as far as locations. You can drive pretty much anywhere with a regular vehicle, though I will cover some specific locations that require a 4x4 vehicle. Flying into the Big Island, you basically have two options. You can fly into the west side or the east side. On the west side, we have Kailua Kona, the biggest airport, biggest town there. And then on the east side, you have Hilo. It just really comes down to logistically if you're going to be starting out one way, doing a loop around the island and coming back to the east coast or vice versa on the west coast. It really doesn't matter. There's an equal amount of locations on both sides. In Kauai, the airport you're going to fly into is in the city of Lihue. And from there, there's plenty of small towns around different areas of the coast, but that is definitely the main city that you will fly into. Camping is available on these islands, and you don't have much to contend with as much as the weather, whether it's raining or something or harsh. But something to keep in mind is that the Hawaiian Islands have kind of a drug problem, meth problem, and so at a lot of these parks and campgrounds, you'll find sort of shady characters, and if you are a photographer traveling around with large amounts of gear, you definitely don't want to leave anything in the car, you don't want to leave anything in your tent or your place that you'll be camping. So it is something to keep in mind. On my trip personally, I stayed at a couple of hostels just because it was the cheap option. I didn't want to stay at the fancy hotels, and I don't really spend much time at the hotel room anyways. And just from the research that I came across, it's not the safest thing to be with a large amount of camera gear at these campgrounds, though it is an option. And on some places like Kauai, it's relatively safe because you're going to be camping like way out in the middle of these national parks, and it's just not a near populated area. So I wouldn't worry so much on Kauai, but on the Big Island, I was a little sketchy about camping out there. There are plenty of hikes to do on these locations, but depending on the year that you visit, especially Kauai is notorious for having extremely muddy and slippery hiking trails. So I do recommend hiking boots, hiking sandals at the minimum, definitely not flip-flops. I have seen some people on the trails hiking barefoot. It's a little dangerous if there's like some sharp rocks or roots sticking out. I wouldn't recommend it. Plus you get all the dirt in your toes, and who knows what kind of funguses and diseases are out there. But be aware that these hiking trails are notoriously slippery and muddy, especially some of the ones I'll cover in Kauai. So let's go ahead and get into the locations. I'm going to cover the Big Island first and then Kauai, which is sort of the order that I did my trip. And I'm going to cover the locations on the west first, some of the north and south, and then make our way to the east, to the Hilo side, the wetter side. And then from there, we'll jump over to Kauai and cover the Kauai locations. So let's dive right in. Just a side note, I'm going to do my best with these names, but as you can imagine, a lot of them are in the native language and they're going to be a little bit difficult to pronounce. So I'll definitely put the text up there so you can understand and Google and research these locations if I'm pronouncing the names incorrectly. If you're flying into Kona, the closest location you'll find there is Wawaloli Beach Park. It is the location of a spot called Pele's Well, very similar to Thor's Well from the Oregon coast. Slightly smaller and not as explosive with the water. Maybe it might be though on higher swell days. I was there on a relatively mellow, calm ocean day, though I did have all the water action that I needed for my photos. You basically, you drive up north. It's just south of the airport. You'll see some solar panels if you're coming up from Kona, and there'll be a point where you make a left turn, you follow the road all the way to the beach, and then you're gonna see a deviation where the road will continue off to the right, but you take a left onto the dirt road, go a little ways down there and you park, and you have to search around the coastline a little bit. It's a little bit down from the dirt road. You walk out onto the lava rocks and you sort of walk towards the left. And if you know what you're looking for, if you have some reference photos, you'll find the well fairly easy enough. Definitely a good sunset spot. Like I said, the water might react differently depending on the high or low tide or when you visit it. But if I was to take the advice from Thor's Well, visit on a high tide day. Of course, you're right next to a coastline, so watch out for rogue waves, large waves that can either wet your gear or sweep you off into the water. But there's a variety of angles to find there. Find leading lines with the cracks, with the seaweed, and just relatively long shutter speed should work out there. Good spot to visit on your first day if you're flying into the Kailua Kona area. An interesting little spot also pretty close to Kona, about 30 minutes drive, is called Anaeho'omalu Bay or Anaeho'omalu Beach, also known as A Beach. It's in a resort and you make your way down, you'll find a parking lot. There's gonna be a little area for some reason where there's cats that hang out. It's like a cat sanctuary. And then you continue walking either down to the beach or there's a little trail that deviates to the right and you'll find a pond, little fish pond. And then across from here, there's a line of trees and there'll be people like walking around in and out of your shot technically that you can Photoshop out later. But it's definitely a good sunset spot to visit. You could do a long exposure, smooth out the water. I experimented with a few things and I was more happy with my regularly exposed photo. Sun shining through the palm trees in the distance, and you can get little close-up or wide shot angles. Experiment with that. Yeah, it's somewhere you can just set up there along the pond. Nobody really bothers you. You'll just have to Photoshop the people out who are walking up and down the path on the beach side. All the way up at the north of the island, but still on the west side, is Pololu Valley. It's about an hour and 20-minute drive from Kona. Basically, you reach the end of the road, there's a parking lot and a small trail, hiking trail that goes all the way down to the beach. It's a sort of cove area, great for sunrise. I actually just hiked, I would say, halfway down the trail to a viewpoint. It's pretty obvious when you get there, even though you kind of set up in the dark if you're going for sunrise. You'll get a nice open view of the valley below. You'll have the cliffs and the mountains in the distance, and the sun will rise from somewhere in that area, depending on what time of year you visit. It's also drones allowed, so you can fly your drone down the valley, down the coastline. Plenty of views to get. I visited, obviously, during this whole COVID situation, forever how long it's going, and there was one other person who was there kind of watching the sunrise and some joggers and hikers that were just making their way down the trail, but very easy to access location, and you get this nice open vista shot of the coastline, very, very classic kind of Hawaiian shot, and easy location to get to. While doing my research, I came across some spots that were just, pretty beaches to visit. One of them is called Punalu'u Black Sand Beach. It's a classic volcanic sand beach. You have some rocky coastlines. Apparently turtles like to pull up there and either lay eggs or just kind of bask in the sun, so it's a good place to get turtle shots. I visited on my drive to the Volcanoes National Park. We just stopped by there for a little bit. There was a lot of tourists around, so I can't say that it was the best for photos at that time of day that I visited, but I could see that if you were just making your way by there and it was sort of morning, golden hour, or sunset, you could experiment with some long expo seascapes kind of stuff and find some shots there. Getting closer to the east side of the island, about 40 minutes from Hilo, a little bit longer from Kailua Kona, if you came from that direction, is the very well-known Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. There's a lot of stuff you can do. You can spend many days here hiking the many trails. I was only there for about a day and a half, and we scouted some locations on the first day and then shot sunrise there. You have the Chain of Craters Road, which kind of goes throughout the whole park. There are such hikes as the Thurston Lava Tube. Definitely was a spot that I wanted to visit, but due to COVID, they had blocked the trail. I assume they don't want people in an enclosed environment, so it was inaccessible, unfortunately. There's Kilauea Trail. There's many pullouts where you'll have these awesome views of the lava flows, which just that in itself, at the right time of day, you can find patterns in the lava flows, and it's like this very black glass. The lava textures are really amazing, and the way it forms just through the natural formation of the cooling of the lava is very interesting, and you can find leading lines and find compositions there. You just have to get there for the right time of day. Obviously, you want something golden hour-ish. When I was there, we did have a lot of scattered rain showers, which were a little bit annoying every time I was setting up for a time lapse. But we basically followed the road all the way down to the ocean. There's a point before then where you'll have an overlook and you'll see the coast, you'll see a little bit of the valley, and you'll be able to look in both directions, and you can actually get there for sunrise or sunset because it's a wide enough vista that you can get both sides. I was there mainly for the sunrise. We did stop by at sunset, but with the scattered rainstorms, I really didn't set anything up. But definitely an easy spot to visit as you're making your drive there. You can kind of scout it out during the day and just drop pins on your Google Maps, which is what I did because a lot of these locations really don't have points or names anywhere. You just drive by, you see something scenic, and you just tell yourself, I'll come back here for sunrise or sunset, and just drop some Google pins along the way, and you'll find just plenty of locations like that. This is also a park where in the past, traditionally, you could see actual live lava bubbling coming down from Kilauea volcano. When I visited, there wasn't any active volcanoes, but ironically, literally a month from the time that we got back, Kilauea actually erupted. So I believe if you visit now, you'll be able to see actual red live lava versus the lava flows, which I saw and still made good for good photos, but you know, everybody visits Volcanoes National Park to see the actual lava flowing to the sea and all that. In the town of Hilo, as I mentioned earlier, you're going to contend with a lot rainier and wetter weather, so a lot of locations will be a little bit trickier to shoot. There's a number of waterfalls you can visit from the few minutes drive from the main town center. There's PP Falls, also known as the Hilo Boiling Pots. It's sort of an underwhelming location because the view that you get from the parking lot is pretty much just the flowing water from the waterfall in the distance. You see what they call the boiling pots. That's closest to the overlook viewpoint, but the waterfall itself is obscured by a rock. And you would think that maybe you could fly a drone over there and get a look, but actually it's a no drone area, unfortunately. From what I hear, there is a hiking trail that'll take you down to the base of the waterfall, and I didn't actually personally do that because I believe it might have been closed off. Due to COVID, a lot of the very popular locations were closed off. We just did a quick scouting from the parking lot and we headed over to the next waterfall nearby in the area, which is known as Rainbow Falls. Same kind of similar situation, no drones allowed, but in this case, from the parking lot, you can walk over to the overlook, and from there you get a pretty decent view of the waterfall. I believe it's called Rainbow Falls because more towards the middle of the day, with the sun in an overhead position, you'll get the rainbow effect from the waterfall spray. I was there in the morning, sort of cloudyish morning, so I got some long expo photos and a little time lapse, but nothing too spectacular. It is a very easy to access waterfall though. About 20 minutes north from Hilo is Akaka Falls State Park. This is a location where there are two waterfalls. One is 100-foot, one is the 442-foot waterfall, and there's a trail that loops around so you can see both of them. I believe the second waterfall is actually called Kahuna Falls. The main waterfall is Akaka. There's a nice looking bamboo forest. There's maybe some setups for some shots, but I only really visited the larger waterfall because we were sort of in a hurry. And unfortunately, you can't even get a good angle of it because it is such a large waterfall, kind of like a large skinny waterfall that you can barely see the bottom. I did get a time lapse. I didn't even bother taking any photos because it was sort of middle of the day. You know, it's a nice little quick stop to visit, but photographically, there wasn't a lot that I could do there. While on the topic of waterfalls, I will mention, as these last few waterfalls that I have mentioned, you cannot fly drones around. If you are making your way up north, you'll cross occasional bridges and you'll see rivers pouring out from sort of the center of the jungle. And through some scouting, looking while you're driving, you'll actually find these sort of secret hidden waterfalls. And because they are unnamed, sort of not popular locations, some of them are a little bit hard to get to even if you try to drive through there or hike. they are actually places that you can fly drones. And so you can get some really cool shots of these waterfalls, which there'll be no people around, and you can fly drones there, and you just have to do a little bit of searching, a little bit of looking off to the sides of the road as you're making your way up or down the coast. In the northeast, about 30 minutes from Hilo, you'll find Laupahoehoe Point or Laupahoehoe Beach Park, and it is basically a boat loading area where there's a sort of rugged, iconic Hawaiian lava rock coastline. There's a few shots that it seems like everybody kind of gets the same angle of, these certain peaks, and makes for a good sunrise location as it is on the east side. When I visited, we unfortunately had a very cloudy sunrise, and so I try to experiment with some either fast shutter speeds of these large waves hitting the rocks or some long exposure type things. Not too happy with any of my shots, but I'll put them up here. And you can also fly drones in this area, though when I was there, like I said, it was cloudy and we had occasional rain showers, so I didn't really put the drone up. But you know, it's one of those classic Hawaiian beach coastlines where you can get the seascape shots and just find patterns with the either waves or lava rocks. Way up in the north, about an hour drive from Hilo, you'll find Waipio Valley. It's a very popular location. When you get there, there's a parking lot at the top, and you'll have a decent view of the valley below. You can either fly a drone there or get whatever shot that you can get. There's some bushes and trees that might be in the way. Or what is probably the better option is to make your way down to the beach, which there is a very steep road that goes down there, but is really only accessible if you have a 4x4 vehicle, because you're going to be going down and you don't want to be using your brakes, and especially to make your way back up. And then there is very bumpy, muddy roads when you get down there. People who don't have a 4x4 vehicle or a Jeep can probably just park, and I've seen them just hike all the way down. Takes a little bit more time, but if you don't happen to have the vehicle required, you can still make your way down to the beach. The beach itself is rocky, not the sharp lava rocks, but the smoothed out round ones. It kind of has a Pacific Northwest vibe to me, especially when I visited. It was sort of cloudy on both occasions. I assume if it was a golden hour, it would look more tropical, but I visited for sunset and sunrise. I must say that it is more of a sunrise location. However, with the right conditions, you might be able to get some shots at sunset. But either way, I had pretty mediocre conditions for sunset, shot some long expos, and I told myself that if I came back for sunrise, the sun would be at a better angle. And of course, showed up there for sunrise, and we had the same crappy kind of weather. As you know, the east side is a little bit more rainy, and especially I was close to winter when I visited. So I didn't really bother getting any drone stuff, but I did get some moody PNW style shots there, long expos, and just kind of made the best of it. But I have seen some very nice sunrise shots with the golden sun shining through the valley, and I can imagine that you would get a lot better shots, and also drone shots flying through the valley as well. A very popular location that people like to visit when they are on the Big Island is Mauna Kea, which is the tallest, largest volcano. There's two volcanoes, as I mentioned, on the island itself, but Mauna Kea is the one with the observatory, the Keck Observatory. But it's one of the few places in the world where you can make it from sea level up to the 14,000 feet in less than an hour. Because this is 14,000 feet, we're talking here, there is the chance of altitude sickness. So when you make the drive, actually, about 20 minutes from the actual observatory, from the actual peak, you'll reach the visitor center, where by force, and they keep track of people as they pull up, whether it's a tour bus or your own vehicle, they'll make you wait there for an hour to acclimate to the altitude, because apparently it's very dangerous to have altitude sickness, something to do with your blood and your brain and bubbles in your bloodstream and all this stuff. What I will say is I was very skeptical about just the existence of altitude sickness, but when we did make it to the observatory at the peak, I was feeling a little bit dizzy. It is a certain weird dizzy feeling that you get, maybe shortness of breath because of the thinner air. I still was able to function, but I can see how somebody who's a little bit more compromised health-wise might have a little bit of a difficult time there. But still, like I said, the park rangers are on location there at the visitor center, and they actually block off the road, and they talk to you, and they see what time you pull up and make sure that you're there for almost an hour. You can get away with a little bit less time, but they make sure you kind of hang out there for an hour, acclimate, and then you make the rest of the drive. The drive up to that point is all paved and easily drivable with any vehicle. The dirt road begins after the visitor center, which technically is still drivable with a regular vehicle, but from what I hear, the reason why they recommend a 4x4 vehicle is on the way back down, you're going to be riding your brakes, and if you have a regular car and you don't have the 4x4 capability, you might overheat your brakes, they might lock up, it's kind of dangerous. So I'm not 100% sure if they will stop you from going up in a regular vehicle, but it is everywhere you read, it's highly recommended to have a Jeep. Just to be safe, you know, you don't want to risk your life for a photo, for a drive. But once you make it up to the observatory, there seems to be a few different points where you can pull out and either set up a camera, take a shot. But there's one main point where you have the view of the 3 telescopes over here, and then a singular one off to the right. And with the right conditions, the shots you're going to want to go for here are these long exposure shots of the low-hanging, you're basically above the clouds, but as they're moving, it becomes this silky fog-like blanket that is just below the peaks. And so you have some of the observatory telescopes, and you have some of the mountain peak, and then this blanket of long exposed cloud. You can shoot into the sun, or just as the sun gets below the horizon, which it'll go below the horizon earlier than normal because you are above the clouds. And there are some colors to play with there. I've seen some astrophotography done. However, when I was there, they made sure everybody left just after sunset, something to do with not getting in the way of the operations of the telescopes and all that, and your car lights shining on the way back down, something to do with that. It was definitely a very unique experience to be that far up above the clouds. There's a few places where you can do that, and you get those classic, as I mentioned, long exposure cloud shots with that silky look, and it's really what people go for when you go up there. As I mentioned, it is a sunset location just due to the angle, and also keep in mind that you're going to be up 14,000 feet, so apart from the altitude sickness risk, it's going to be very cold up there, so bring a jacket, a beanie, and whatever you need. Even if you visit in the summer, it's going to be cold up there. Just a side note, I will be covering mostly photography locations in this guide, but I am an avid scuba diver myself, and I did a couple of scuba diving trips on the Big Island and on Kauai Islands. So I will cover that just for people who are into underwater photography. It's kind of like a new interest of mine, and you need all the proper gear for it, but there's plenty of scuba diving to be done in Hawaii, the Big Island, and all the islands in general. On the Big Island itself, the best scuba diving spots are going to be on the west side, because you are in the lee of the island and the waters are calmer. I hear there is scuba diving on the Hilo side, on the east side, but it's just very dependent on the water conditions. So when you are planning your scuba diving on the west side, I went with a company called Kona Honu Divers, and they offer all the local diving locations as well as what is very popular, the manta ray night diving. Side note about the manta ray night diving, the manta rays are not guaranteed. They will give you this whole speech when you take the tour, but fortunately, if you do not see any manta rays, which we did not, we saw dolphins, we saw eels, we saw plenty of squid and nighttime creatures, and they set up this what they call the underwater campfire, and they shine these lights up which attract the plankton, which are supposed to attract the manta rays. And so the whole scene in itself is pretty photogenic, and there are shots to be had there. But from what I hear, if you do not see manta rays, and they keep a log of all this, if you do not see manta rays on your dive, you have up to a year to rebook for free, and you'll be sort of like on a standby option depending on how full the tour is. So they do give you a no manta guarantee, and that's nice because you can never know when nature shows up or it doesn't. The other dives, there's numerous other sites. I'm not going to name them all, but you can see anything from all your typical tropical fish, dolphins, white-tip sharks, eels, octopus, if you know how to find them, and very interesting fish. There's a frogfish, something that I'd never seen before, and all sorts of cool animals that you would expect to find on these tropical Hawaii islands. But definitely, if you're into diving, consider signing up for some dives while you're there. Moving on to Kauai, most of our locations are going to be spread out across the island, but as I mentioned, you'll be flying into Lihue. I'm going to start with locations nearby there, where we have Wailua Falls. It's about 12 minutes from the center of town, and it's a very easy to access waterfall. You pull up, there's a parking lot, and the view you're going to get from there is actually from the top, looking down, which isn't the best and easiest to photograph. There are no drones allowed there, even though you might see a tourist or two with a drone. Of course, you get into the issues of whether you can use the footage or not, but what you can do, and a lot of people do, is you find this opening in the fence and you climb through, and there is a sort of sketchy especially if it's after a rain or just in general kind of muddy. Sketchy hike using ropes down a very steep path down to the base of the waterfall, though it is easy enough that it's very common and a lot of people do it. And the view you get down there is a lot more photogenic and rewarding, and a lot of angles to work with. However, when I visited, it was after a very crazy rainstorm, and the waterfall looked nothing like it normally looks like in all these photos. It was like this crazy gushing waterfall, and there was just so much action in the water, which I've seen people, you know, walk around or swim in the water or along the water's edge normally. In our case, it was just flowing like crazy, and it was something that if you got into the water, you would be dragged way downstream, so it was definitely not worth doing. But under most occasions, it is a very nice, peaceful waterfall. It's got two streams coming down, and I've seen some very cool photos shot there. Nearby, not too far from Lihue, is the Opaeka'a Falls. It's a waterfall with a parking lot, easy to access. The only thing is it's quite far away, so the view, you can see it from the road, but it's not the easiest to shoot, and I believe drones are allowed here, so I was able to fly my drone over to the waterfall, got some cool top-down and side long expo stuff with the drone. It was after that rainstorm, so it is kind of muddy water, not the most photogenic looking, but it's a 151-foot waterfall, so it's pretty big, and nearby Lihue if you're staying in the area. In the south of the island, about 30 minutes drive from Lihue, is a location called Spouting Horn. It's sort of in a resort. You make your way through these resort neighborhoods and you'll get to this parking lot which overlooks what Spouting Horn is, which is basically a water spout, geyserish kind of thing coming up from the rocks, very high pressured. But the size of the spout itself will depend on the swell and the tide. When I was there, it probably spouted up to about 10 feet, 7 feet. Really nothing too special, but I do hear from the locals that if it is a big swell and you have the right conditions, it can go up to 60 feet, which must make for a lot better photo. Most people can view it from the overlook viewpoint. However, there is a hole in the fence, and a lot of people just make it their way down to the beach or to the rocks in the area. I believe it's for safety reasons, and they don't want people to get swept away by the ocean. But you can make your way down there and get closer angles. Additionally, off to the left, there is a sort of well, kind of more similar to the Pele's well rather than the Thor's well. And it's the water that comes up, and it's a sunken area in the rocks. And I got a cool shot there, same similar receding water style. I was there for sunset, so we had the nice sun in the background. And this spot in general is a sunset area, as it is sort of on the west, southwest-ish kind of area. One of the most iconic areas of Kauai is the Napali coast, and also in that general area is Waimea Canyon. It's a state park area, very beautiful. It's a 1-hour drive from Lihue, and as you're making your way up, you'll see various pullouts, and you'll have different views, and they're like unnamed pullout areas. They are sometimes near a parking spot, so if you see a photo online, it's probably near one of the parking pullouts, and you can get plenty of views. I would say it's good for sunrise or sunset. It's not good during cloudy days, which unfortunately the sunrise that I was there, it was quite cloudy and we didn't really have any colors. But I have seen photos and time lapses of the clouds moving above this very beautiful canyon, and they call it the Grand Canyon of Kauai because it's very similar layout, except the iconic red dirt and just the way the canyon walls are formed, these specific lines and stuff. And there's plenty of angles to find there. I would kind of suggest the same as when you're visiting Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. Make the drive and drop a pin at various viewpoints, and then come back later during golden hour, and that way you can have your views scouted already. And yeah, there's just plenty to see there. Unfortunately, you'll see drone footage and stuff shot in Waimea Canyon, but drones are not allowed because it's a state park. When you reach the end of the road, about 1 hour and 20 minutes from Lihue, so it's an extra 20-minute drive from Waimea Canyon, you'll find Kalalau Lookout. Very iconic view. In the photos you'll see from here are everywhere online, and basically there's a parking lot and there's a nice open viewpoint. However, there is trees and bushes, and so it sort of obscures the viewpoint, so I wouldn't recommend shooting from the actual parking lot. I would recommend getting there a decent amount of time early, maybe an hour before you actually plan to shoot, so maybe 2 hours before sunset. And then there's a small hiking trail off to the left, which goes for a long way, but at maybe 10-15 minutes in, you will reach a open viewpoint and you get a side view of the canyon of the Kalalau Lookout. I have seen photos shot more from the center, so I believe that the hiking trail splits at certain points and you can get more to the center of the trail. And I think it might even go actually all the way down to the bottom. I haven't explored it, but you'll see various angles, and definitely shoot from these various angles along the trail rather than shooting from the parking lot. I was there for sunset. It was decent. I assumed different times of the year the sun is going to be in different places, and depending on the clouds, there was a little bit of color, a little bit of light rays shining through, but I believe it makes for a better sunrise location. I did camp out in the area and go back for sunrise, but it was a cloudy, moody sunrise and it was raining, so I didn't really get any photos there. And you can shoot the obvious wide shot, or you'll find hidden gems and compositions within this craggy canyon walls, and there's actually a little waterfall there that some people get a close-up shot of, and you can find sort of abstract compositions in these patterns of the canyon walls. Keep in mind that due to the elevation, it can be foggy, windy, and kind of cold. When I had my camera set up, the wind was actually coming in gusts, and so I had to occasionally hold on to my tripods to keep them from blowing away and falling down the canyon. So take the proper precautions, bring a jacket and all that, and just be prepared for slightly colder weather. As far as the rest of the Napali coast, there are plenty of hiking trails. I didn't do too much research into it, but there are plenty of hiking trails that'll take you along various areas. There's campgrounds, there's places to stay while you're in Waimea Canyon or Kokei National Park. I'm not sure where the divisions are, but there's plenty of places to stay while you're in the area. But you will see these iconic shots taken from the air of the iconic coastlines, and those are not shot with drones. Occasionally they might be, however, illegal. What you can do is take a helicopter tour. There's various companies that do it different times of the day. There's helicopter tours that'll take you to the Jurassic Park waterfall, which is like on private property, which is why there's some special way that they do it, and I think they land there too. But with the helicopter tours, they're usually around $300 for an hour, and they take you all around the island. Probably specifically focusing on the Napali coast. One thing to keep in mind when you're booking these helicopter tours is that most of them don't require you to pay a deposit or to book it or to pay for it in advance, so your reservation is sort of in the air. So I would give a several days kind of alternative options for days to book it. Maybe book it at the beginning of the set of days so you'll be in the area, because in my experience we had a sunrise booking for a particular day that happened to be incredibly stormy, and they basically just canceled our reservation, and there was a reservation later in the afternoon that was fully booked, so they don't move your reservation around. If you have another day open, I would have a few days available. You can move it to another day, but just keep that in mind that they kind of disregard your reservation pretty easily. So have other days open that you can move your reservation around if the weather is not conducive or safe for a helicopter flight. While you're in the Waimea Canyon area, as you're making your way up or down, there is a sort of a roadside gem. It's called the Red Dirt Waterfall. You might see it in some of the promotional material for Kauai. And it's basically a series of mounds of this red dirt and a little trickling, very small waterfall that comes through and has several drops into what the main waterfall is probably about 10 feet high. So it's definitely nothing epic or anything like that. For whatever reason, seems to be popular, especially on social media. And I experimented with a few angles and stuff, but it was a little bit too late in the sunrise for me to get anything as far as good lighting. So I think I got some video shots and I flew my drone over there, but really didn't find or shoot anything that I liked. Up in the north, about 45 minutes from Lihue, is a pretty iconic location known as Queen's Bath. It's strangely enough located in another little gated community resort kind of place. You'll find it on the GPS, but you'll get to this little parking lot area, and then all of a sudden there's a fence, and you'll see a bunch of people either coming out covered in mud or going in not covered in mud into this hole in the fence. And it's a short hike, maybe about 15-20 minute hike. But something that I didn't come across in any of my research was how slippery and how, I don't want to say difficult, but it's a tricky hike to make, especially if it had been raining anywhere in the last few days and you're carrying a lot of gear like I do. There's people slipping around all the time, and it's pretty common with all these Kauai hikes. It's all pretty slippery dirt everywhere you go. Falling on your ass is not that uncommon. So take caution when you're coming through on this hike, especially when you're coming back after a sunrise in the dark. Bring your headlamps and hike slowly. Once you get to the beach, it's one of those classic Hawaii, Kauai rugged coastlines, lava rocks, very large waves occasionally. Apparently, there's a sign that says nearby that says that 70 people have died, or a certain amount of people have died in being swept away and drowning and all that. So you do want to take care when you're standing next to an area on these rocks where there is a lot of wet areas around, which means that occasionally a very large wave comes through. A friend of mine that I was on the trip with was standing a little too close with his recording gear and his camera and got fully splashed. So even though it might seem like not that crazy or not that large waves coming through, there'll be the big set and it might catch you off guard, and if you have your camera gear or if you're staying too close and somewhere slippery, there's a danger of getting swept away into the ocean. So keep your eye out, stay aware, and other than that, once you're in this area, there is the main Queen's Bath area, which is a small waterfall and a sort of little cove the water comes in from, and you can actually climb down to the bottom of that. Depending on how high the tide is, you want to keep your eye on it for a few minutes before you make that climb down in there. But you can get a cool shot from the inside of sort of like a cave and the waterfall and a long exposure of the water coming up, or you can shoot from the top. I've seen photos shot at sunrise and sunset, and it really depends on the time of year. Some of the best photos that I saw online were the sun shining directly in and reflecting on the side, the rock wall, and then you have the waterfall lit up. Unfortunately, when I was there, I went for 2 sunsets. The first occasion was kind of cloudy, so it wasn't even that good at all. The second occasion, we did have some colors in the clouds, but the sun was too far off and didn't really light up the inside of that canyon. But there are plenty of compositions to find there just from the top of the rocks, looking out over the water, looking at the sea cliffs in the distance. You can also fly your drone there, so there's plenty of shot options to have there, and pretty accessible location apart from that tricky little hike that you have to make to get in. I'll also mention that there is scuba diving in Kauai. It's also a very popular location. I did 1 day of scuba diving when I was there. We saw some pretty cool animals, some very iconic puffer fish and your classic white-tip sharks and stuff like that. So there is scuba diving options in Kauai as well. That's a wrap for this video on my trip to Hawaii. Very beautiful tropical location destination. Doesn't have to be as expensive as you would think. You'll have plenty of options to shoot these iconic seascapes and the lava rocks, and they have the jungles and waterfalls and hikes, and there's just a lot to see there on the tropical spectrum of things. Very unique coastlines, especially in Kauai, and options for the helicopter tours, as I mentioned, and you'll get some very amazing shots. And if you are a outdoor enthusiast and you like very muddy, challenging hikes, well, this might be also a location for you. So if you have any questions or comments on any information, any of the locations, leave it in the comment section below. Be sure to check out the rest of my videos for more travel content, photography guides, and tutorials, and be sure to like and subscribe for more.